The next few chapters are going to go through some of the different ways you can represent three-dimensional objects. So we have the top, bottom, front, back, right, left, kind of 90-degree angle, parallel projection views. Depending on what angle you look at this from, you can either have equal angles, just one angle for each of these, or maybe you match up two of the angles and have one that's different. And for all of these, it's going to depend on what you are representing. So this is an interesting case. If you have a slanted surface, that is not going to show up on those 90-degree angle orthographic views well, that everything's going to be a little bit distorted on that surface. How would you show straight on what's happening for that surface? And that is an auxiliary view. And I'll show you how to make one of these views in CAD using VIEWSECTION, as well as the standard orthographic views using VIEWBASE on here. So this is one of the things that I'll do, and I wanted to walk through one of the worksheets. So I went ahead and made a PowerPoint presentation that has some screenshots on this. Something really confusing about those worksheets, they have a border around the grid paper. That border on the grid paper is not part of the object itself, so I went ahead and tried to remove that border to make it a little less confusing. The first thing for all of these is to count squares, map out all of the corners, the length of this thing. So again, looking down straight at the top of it versus the front and the right-hand side of it. I picked this one because it has a nice slanted surface, so you can picture this as kind of a flat top and then maybe a slide that's going down. And I'm going to put a few features on this surface to walk through those auxiliary views. Thinking through the best way to create these, a lot of times starting from the front view and then extruding from that front view can be one way to make these shapes. It might be easier to make from the top view and push it down, or from the right view to push it over, but this one has some nice features that I think it's going to be, and there's no right way to make this. It could be a wedge and a rectangle, or I can just draw that whole front view in and pull it out, but I thought this might be an easier way to make it. So let me go ahead and I will walk through all of this in CAD so that you can see it. And there are also PowerPoint slides walking through each of these. We will finish off with the VIEWBASE to make those orthographic projections, and one final sectional view to pull off looking at that slanted surface. I'll then put some things into that slanted surface so it's a little bit more interesting. These orthographic VIEWBASE and VIEWSECTION views, they'll update as you add features into your model. So I like to kind of make those sectional views early on and then go back and forth between the sectional views and the layout and the actual object in the model space. Okay, so this is what I'll be walking through. I am going to start with the front view, and so the first thing I want to do is I want to rotate my XY coordinate system so that it's actually on the front of the object. Remember, two-dimensional sketches happen on the XY plane, and so if I want the front view to show up as front on future sectional views, I'm going to think through that and make sure that I'm drawing on the front of my view cube. So that's going to entail moving my user coordinate system around. So this is what it looks like right now. XY is on the ground plane, and my front view is on that XZ plane. So I'm going to use the right-hand rule And I'm going to rotate 90 degrees around my x-axis to be able to draw on the front of the box. So user coordinate system, UCS, and I'm going to leave the origin where it is and just click X. This will take where my coordinate system is and it's going to rotate it around the x-axis. If you take the fingers of your right hand and curl them around the x-axis, so your thumb is pointing to the right, that is the direction that we just rotated this. So we pick that up so that the XY plane is not on the ground. It's now standing up so that what I draw is now on the XY plane. We can rotate things after the fact if you don't want to go through this step, but in the future, when we're doing the view-based views, it's going to be oriented with that world coordinate system. And so however you draw it oriented on the model space, you'll have to rotate it and move it around and fight with it to be able to get the correct top, front, right views if you don't start drawing on the right plane. So yeah, that's the first step, is to just, instead of XZ, I want XY on here. When you move your UCS, it also moves the view cube. So, but moving that around 90 degrees, that will, you are actually drawing on the front of the page. Okay, I'm not going to draw the entire front view. I'm just going to draw this front piece. Make it like a cake, one layer at a time. So I'm going to do this slide piece of it that's coming towards us. So I'm going to walk around using a P-line, polyline, and make this shape that I'm then going to pull this shape forward, and then I'll push this shape back. And so I won't have to move my user coordinate system around after this. I'm just going to pull one forward, pull one back, and then I'll have the front view as a front view. And hopefully, I think that's the easiest way to create this. Okay, so walking around this coordinate, I'm going to go ahead and again start with a polyline P-line rather than a regular line. The P-line connects each of those line segments together. I'm going to start with 0.00, making sure my dynamic input is off. So if it's not letting you put in coordinate points based on your coordinate system, it's probably because your dynamic input is not there. But if that's off, so it's not blue, I should be able to start typing in coordinates. So 0, 0, enter. My next point is 10, 0. And I can zoom out of this to make sure that I'm looking at this correctly. So I just went from 0, 0 to 10, 0. This next point is going up the slide. So I'm going to 2, 6. And then the top of the slide is going to be up here. So I'm going back to 0 and 6 high. So 6 is the Y coordinate. This last point, I'm not going to type 0, 0. I'm actually going to type C for close. That will close my loop and make sure that I have joined lines that will extrude as a solid, not as a surface. Let me just show you the difference here. So as I go to extrude this, if I'm going to explode this, don't do this, but I just want to show you the difference between individual line segments where these guys are not joined together and what trouble that makes. So if my lines are not joined together, if I used line instead of polyline, and then I go to extrude this thing, okay, what will happen is I don't have a solid here. What I have, let me switch to conceptual, I have a surface. That's not what I want. I can't 3D print that. I don't want a surface. I want a solid. And the only way to get a solid is if all of these lines are joined into a loop. So in order to do that, if you didn't use a polyline, Join, I'm joining this thing together. I can say Control A or Select All, Enter, and it says 4 objects converted to one polyline. So P line, that's what I want. I want joined line segments. And you can see that as I click on this, everything highlights together. So it's all one object. It's a complete closed loop, which means that this time around, when I extrude it, I won't get a shell. It's not going to be a piece of paper surface. It's going to be an actual solid. You can see it doesn't look like grid paper anymore. It doesn't have all those extra lines on it. Okay, so look at the direction of my z-axis. Coming out of the board is positive, going into the board is negative. So positive, negative. I'm going to bring this part forward, positive 6, and that is looking from the top piece. So what I did is I brought this piece forward 6, and that will allow me to then draw the back along the same plane and push the back. Okay, so I have this first piece drawn now, and the next thing that I'm going to do is to draw the back. There's a couple different ways. I can make a circle and do a bunch of trimming, or there's this really neat command called Fillet that will take a corner and round it into a circle. So I think the easiest way to make this is to start with a rectangle and then carve the corner off with the fillet command. So I'm going to make a rectangle 0 to 10, 10, and then I'll use this fillet command. I'll have to set the radius. So inside these square brackets, there's all of the little options and customizations. So I'll just hit R. That will get me the radius. And then I'll type in this distance of 3 for the radius, and that will just carve away that corner for me. And then once I have that together, I'm going to push it negative. So the other one went forward, positive 6. This one is going to push back negative 4. And that will get me the entire object. And then I can go and try out my VIEWBASE command. Okay, so here's the next piece that I'm going to create here is this 10 by 10 square that I'm going to push back 4. Okay, so you can see my XY coordinate system, it's still on that back side. I don't have to move my coordinate system around. I have it planned so that I don't have to move that as much. REC, you don't have to type in rectangle. Just the first 3 letters of a command are usually enough to get to what you want. And I'm going to start with 0, 0, go up to 10, 10. So now I have kind of a square on the back of this. And the next thing I'm going to do is use this fillet command. There's 2 different things. There's fillet that will get me a rounded corner. There's also chamfer, which will give me a straight corner where I define the distance to one side and the distance to the other side. But I'll use the fillet command. Again, I can either click on it in the ribbon or type fillet. And before I start going through this, I need to click on radius. Right now, my radius is set at 0. So I want to specify that radius is 3, enter. And now I'm going to click on the first object. So there's my first object. And now select the second object. For all of these, just keep reading what it asks you to do in the command line. So that was a fillet command. If you want to see that one more time, let me go through. I'm going to say FILLET, enter. I'm not going to select the first object. I'm going to click R for radius. See all these little options in the square brackets, R. And then I'm going to say 3. I want radius of that circle to be 3. And now I'm going to click on the first object. And now the second object. And now the corner is where I need it to be. Now, before I push this back, I need to make sure that it's still one object. If I click on this and everything doesn't highlight together, you're going to need to join it together. Let me show you. This is a little bit trickier to join this together because now I have multiple objects. So I'm going to explode this apart just to show you a trick. If I select something starting at the right-hand side, I have to be completely around the whole thing to select it. Versus if I select it from the right-hand side, anything I touch, it's going to grab anything I touch. Now, let's say I don't want to select my 3D solid. I want to select the line that is behind that 3D solid. So, Shift, push down. I'm holding down my Shift key and holding down my scroll button. So I'm holding both of those down while I'm moving my mouse. And I'm going to reorient this so I'm looking straight at the side. And then I'm going to start on the left and select it to the right. So what this does, it's ignoring the solid because I'm not completely encircling the solid. So this is only grabbing what is inside that selection area. So now I have the line selected, but I don't have the solid selected. So play around with those selection tools so you can kind of carve out and pick just one little piece of it. And I'm going to join those together. Make sure I have a closed loop that I am extruding this as a solid, not a surface. Okay, so here we go, extrude. And I now have a closed loop. Select objects, enter. And this time, I'm not going forward, I'm going backwards. So make sure you can see the direction. It has the positive directions highlighted there. And I'm going to click -4. I'm going backwards this time, not forward. Okay, one last thing. Because this was 2 different extrusions, I have 2 separate pieces. So this is not connected to my slide. If I want these guys connected, I'm going to use union, U-N-I-O-N. Union joins 3-dimensional objects together. Join is used for 2-dimensional shapes. So there's union. And now when I click on it, the entire thing highlights together. It's all one solid piece. Okay, last step, I'm going to move my user coordinate system back to the original spot. So I'm going to say world. And with this view, I can click on my front. So I can see the slide coming down on my front. There's the top view. So I have this oriented on here with the right-hand side and the front and the top, just like it was on that worksheet, which means when I go over to the layout, that will have the same orientation. Okay, so there's viewports. A viewport is something that is kind of a window into my model space. There's paper space and there's model space. So it's a window into this right here where I drew it. Okay, before I use ViewBase in my layout, I forgot to pull up my template with a title block. So I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste my title block. Again, this is just rectangles, so it's an 11 by 8.5 size rectangles with other rectangles that have M text in it. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this. If you put it on your clipboard, you can go from one file to another. So I'm going to grab this guy with a base point and come out to my layout space. If the piece of paper is not the right size, you can go over here to the page setup manager and modify this so you can have, 17 by 22. You can have huge poster boards instead of just the standard letterhead. You can orient this landscape or a portrait. When you select a printer, it will put the margins on here that, the printer can't go to the edge of the piece of paper, so it'll actually add dashed lines showing you. So this is just kind of a standard printer, but I'm going to add this. So this is on my paper. It's not in the model space, and it's just, one of those standard things that usually you'll have a title block with your name, company, class, project. Is this inches, centimeters, what kind of numbers are on there, scale, date. So for us, we're going to go through VIEWBASE and VIEWSECTION, auxiliary views, just any pertinent notes of what it's made out of, surface finish. If there's some kind of information to organize on there, that's going to go in your title block. Okay. Another thing, save often and save with some kind of a name like Chapter 3, Exercise 1 that is descriptive so you can easily find the file later on. Okay, so now that I have my title block all set up in my layout, I'm going to start up VIEWBASE command. And this command can take some time, so be patient with it. I can either open up something from a different file, or I can grab the 3D model out of my model space. So for this one, I'm grabbing this out of my model space. Before I click on it, I can change the orientation here. So if this is not showing up as the front, if I see the side view or something, I can mess around with the orientation here. If it's not the right size, I can change the scale of it. So right now it's 1:4, but if I want to change that, I could. So I'll just leave it at 1:4 because that looks fairly good. It looks at the piece of paper and the object and it tries to scale it for you. Okay, so I'm going to put the left side, I'm left clicking, enter, and now I'm going to click, 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 right click, and enter. That was probably confusing. Let me do that one more time because it's the very first time you use VIEWBASE. It's frustrating. So you're going to say VIEWBASE. I want to grab it out of my model space, whatever's in these chevron brackets. If I hit enter, it'll do what's in these chevron brackets. So enter. Before I click it on the screen, I can change my orientation or my scale. Let's say I put it down and I hit enter. And then I forget to put the rest of my views. So another way to get those projected views, or a way to get a lot of things on this. So maybe I forgot what my scale is. I have to update this to say what the scale actually is. So I can go to quick properties and say, oh, my scale is actually 1:4. So I better come over here on my title block and change my scale so that it's not 1:2 anymore, that it's 1:4. If you double click on it, it'll open it up so that you can edit that text on there. Okay, so now let's say I want to do some more projected views. So I'm going to right click on it again. Up here, there's Create View, and I can say Project View. So I'm going to pull it up, left click, pull it to the right, left click, pull it up, left click. When I'm done, I can hit enter to exit, or I can right click exit, but there are my orthographic views of this thing. After you've placed a view, if you say, oh, that I should have, whatever you projected it from, grab that guy and it'll move everything together. So it'll make sure that the top is lined up, but it'll probably be easiest to kind of move things around from that front view and think of things from a front view. You want lots of room on here to dimension it in the future. And I'm also giving myself room for a sectional view. If you want to, maybe this 3D view is a little bit too large, so I can actually right-click on it and pull up those quick properties. And I can say, rather than from the parent view, I want my own custom view. I want to make this smaller. And maybe instead of 1 to 4, I want to create this as, I don't know, some custom view, right? So 1/4 versus, I don't know, 3/16 instead. That's too small. So anyways, you can mess around with stuff over here if you want, maybe 1 to 5. Just make it a little bit smaller so I have more room to move stuff. So right click on things and you can change it. You can drag views around. You can give yourself more room and kind of get things on there just the way you want. Okay, now I wanted to put something interesting on this, but before I do that, I'm going to try the view section. So there's VIEWBASE that gives you the orthographic projections. View section, I can cut this thing in half, or I can pull a view off of the front of this thing. So this is actually taking that slanted surface that might be a little bit strange to try and view, and I'm going to pull it off the front and create it there. Now you'll see that I now have a few things that are overlapping one another, so I'm going to have to, pull this around and see if I can resize some things so that it's not overlapping. Any of the text, I can click on the text and move it around. If I want to change the text size, again, right click, quick properties. So maybe I want to change the text height from 0.24 to, I don't know, 0.2. We'll just make it a little bit smaller. See how that's a little bit smaller on there? But the idea of this, see that AA? So it's labeled over here AA, and it's pulling the surface off of here. You can actually click on this and move it around, and it'll slice through this thing. Let me do something weird. So it'll slice through it however you have this dragging through. But right now, the hatched part it's actually cutting through this back piece of it. So it's showing you a little bit of the back piece as well as the front surface of this slope. Okay, I'm going to go back over to the model space and I'm going to add a few features to this slope just so it's something interesting on that ox view. So right now my coordinate system is in the center of this thing, and remember we draw on the XY plane. So I'm going to go ahead and move my coordinate system so that my XY plane is on this slanted surface. So I'm going to say user coordinate system, UCS, enter, and follow what it asks me to do. So specify the origin. Now I have my snaps turned on so that when I hover over this surface, I can come over here and it's going to grab a hold of this corner because my snaps are turned on. Okay, so now that I have the origin, it says specify point on the x-axis. This is really important that I get is snapped in place. If it's 1 degree off, everything I draw will be 1 degree off. So really make sure that your snaps are on. I'm going to turn maybe the grid off so that we're snapping to the object and not to the grid. So the next point is on the XY plane. I'm actually going to pull my Y axis into place. So now I have my coordinate system so that that XY plane is on the slanted surface. Okay, so on this slanted surface, maybe I want to, I don't know, put a circle right down the middle. So I'm going to draw a line right down the middle just to make sure it's centered. Sometimes it's like an optical illusion to try and figure out where something is on this. So here's my circle command, and I'm going to grab the midpoint of that line, get in the habit of rotating things around and making sure that you're drawing where you think you're drawing on this thing. So if this was a width of 6, I'll make my radius, I don't know, I'll make a nice big 4-inch wide circle here. And next I'll put a rectangle on it. So I'll put just let's see, 0.25. I'll put them in the corner somewhere. Maybe 2, 2. Nice big rectangle. Okay, so just a couple of interesting things. And this time, rather than extrude, I'm going to use the press pull command. And what that will allow me to do is actually create a hole in this. So if I pull it up, it'll be a solid, but back through it will be a hole. If I don't click, if I say M for multiple, that will let me select both square and the circle at the same time. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pull these all the way through so that they create a hole. Let me just come over here to conceptual. Yeah, so now I have something interesting that should then show up on my layout. So you can see, looking straight down at the top, it doesn't really look like a circle. It looks like an oval, and the rectangle is distorted, but for the auxiliary view, I can now look straight on that slanted surface, so I don't have a distorted shape anymore. So it looks straight down at it, and I can then dimension this view much more clearly. So that's the sectional view. If I wanted to, let me show you one other sectional view that I can do. So I could take this and actually slice into it to see that hole coming through the middle. So that might also be kind of interesting to see that hole through the middle. Okay, so that's view section versus view base. View base created those orthographic views, and view section, you can section it out. So I can get a full view cutting straight into it, or I can pull a surface view off of it, and it just gives us a much more clear view of what's happening in things.